Hey guys, just wanted to do a quick video recap on what we covered on Saturday. So we looked at masculinity. In particular, we were exploring the relationship between our feelings of masculinity in the face of failure or rejection. But in general, before we got to that stage, we were just looking at masculinity in a broad sense and how each of us as individuals apply it to ourselves and the way we measure it. And a couple of the key sort of points that we were looking at is sort of what shapes our version of masculinity. How do we gauge our masculinity? How do we create our vision of what masculinity is and what being a man is to us as an individual? So for me, my idea of a man sort of always used to be sort of James Bond, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris type characters. They were warriors, they were fighters, they were tough, rough, super alpha male sort of characters. They were really good with ladies. They always got the girl, they always won. They were the Michael Jordans of the sporting world or whatever. Superheroes basically. And this is sort of the idea of masculinity that I developed, that you needed to go out and you needed to fight, you needed to drink lots of alcohol, you needed to root lots of women, and you just basically you could have no feelings, no emotions. You just needed to be rough, tough, all the time. And that was my idea of the perfect man, and that's the sort of the man I wanted to be. And I was talking about my relationship with my dad and how he never showed many emotions when I was growing up. Like, I can't ever remember him crying or anything like that. And that was sort of carried forward with me, is that I developed this idea that emotions, any emotional display, any sort of display of vulnerability was weakness. And so my idea of masculinity became quite aggressive. It became quite misogynistic. It became quite forceful. I saw the man as the leader, as the dominant force in everything, rather than maybe being a partner, or there were times when weakness or whatever, or being able to take a back seat was okay. I saw all of that as being a negative. And so, we talked about societal pressure, and the way society has created what masculinity, societal expectations around our masculinity. How, like, we all have these visions that you need to be the greatest lover every time you go and be with a woman, that, you always need to earn more money. Guys talked about struggling about the idea that women out there earn more money than them, or that they might have a female boss, or, that they'd failed sexually. All these different social constraints around and social pressures around what masculinity was for them, and the way that they needed to conform to society's view of masculinity and what being a man was. Often, it was really reinforced by the friends that they hung out with, their peers, their social groups. For me, growing up in a rugby culture with rugby friends and stuff, masculinity was really tied to that sort of gladiator culture, the drinking and the rugby, and you had to be good at sports and all that sort of thing. And I remember when I was at school, I would hide interest, like I enjoyed playing things like Dungeons and Dragons, but I didn't want to go and do it because I didn't want to seem like less of a man. I felt like if I played Dungeons and Dragons, I didn't go and play rugby, then I was less of a man. So I squashed things that I was generally interested in, and I sort of kept secret connections and friendships with people who probably were better fits with me than the people I actually made friends with, or sort of were friends with in the sort of wider social circle at school, because I wanted to appear more masculine. And so, we talked about that. We talked a lot about, the pressures that society places on us. And we came to the conclusion that actually each person needs to define their own masculinity. And that masculinity comes from, your values-based decision-making, the values that drive you, like things like failure, things like rejection, to have courage to face those, to have courage to cry, to have courage to admit you're wrong, to have courage to be okay with, someone earning, a woman earning more money than you, or, like having courage to show, for me, having courage to show love to my daughter and affection to my daughter, and not be embarrassed by that. So, courage to be honest, courage to take responsibility, all these different things, all these values coming into play. But the idea that masculinity is quite fluid, it's quite flexible for each of us, and that actually a lot of what societal norms, what society considers as masculine, if you put them all into one person, if you just added all these traits into one person, they wouldn't actually be that appealing. They'd be, sort of masculinity on steroids, and that can be a really sort of powerful disconnector with other people when you are so alpha male, when you're so aggressive, so dominant. Your masculinity is just in their face, and it really becomes a caricature of, for me, what I would actually think the sort of man I would like to be. So we looked at that, we discussed that. One of the ideas that we did discuss is, and we were talking in this case, sexual performances, and I was talking about some of the failures I'd had sexually and stuff in the past. And just the idea that I can't actually ever remember any girl or any woman like taking the piss out of me for my sexual prowess or sexual failure. I don't actually ever remember any cruelty or any at the time any woman really taking me to task on that. But what I definitely know and what I definitely remember is my friends, any sort of sexual failure, any sort of sexual, any sort of weakness, perceived weakness, was just really ripped apart, was really just targeted, and just, they worked at it. And I think, partly that could have been because of their own insecurities, and that picking on someone else could cover up their own worries about sexual performance. But just, we discussed the idea that actually, the societal version of masculinity and the ideas around masculinity that we share are not actually created by women. They're created by other men, so we're judging other men to these standards of masculinity. We're creating the pressures around masculinity. And I think a great example for me is the idea that when you go into a club and if you sleep, you pick up lots of girls, and there's an expectation you try and sleep with lots of women, and you pick up women, and you're a stud if you do that. You're rewarded. The other guys are impressed. They congratulate you. They encourage you, and so there's that pressure to go and do that. And that comes from men, other men. So I guess the idea at the end of the day was. True masculinity is about accepting, the failures. It's embracing, the weaknesses in you, and the idea that rejection, failure, all these different things, that's actually true courage. By embracing those, by moving towards them, by letting them into your life, you're strengthening yourself. You're improving your ability to deal with the challenges in your life, and you're demonstrating true courage. By being honest in situations where you're not comfortable, by doing those sorts of things, by expressing your emotions, by crying, and being okay with that. All of that, to me, is real masculinity. And I think in the room, we were starting to get to that stage where guys were being able to define masculinity for themselves, rather than this is what I need to be in terms of society's version of a man. Because everyone has slightly different versions of what they would like to see in themselves as a masculine male. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that we don't need to all conform to society's view of what masculinity is. You can go and make your own version. But it's likely to encompass, and I would encourage you to reflect and explore on exactly what would make up your ideal sort of version of masculinity. What would you like to be as a man, and what would you like to stand for as a man? So yeah, just be curious about it, reflect on it, and take time to explore it. Because if you're always trying to be James Bond, if you're always trying to be Chuck Norris, if you're always trying to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's not necessarily a really healthy image to try and live up to. It can actually cause, values misconceptions and behavior conflicts. So yeah, look, hope that was a little short video, just useful, sort of get some thoughts around masculinity that we discussed on Saturday. If you've got any other questions, or if you want to explore a little bit deeper, drop me a message on Facebook or whatever. Otherwise, see you guys at the next Inner Circle. Take care, boys. See you.